It's time to talk Gonzaga basketball.
Get ready.
It's the Spokesman-Review Zags Insiders Podcast.
Here we go.
Here's Jim Meehan and Richard Fox.
Well, can't say good Monday morning this time around because it's Wednesday. We delayed taping the Zags Basketball Insiders Podcast a couple of days. We took a holiday break like most of the rest of the world did, but happy Wednesday morning. And it's Jim Meehan with you from the Spokesman-Review. We've got Richard Fox, television analyst for Gonzaga games on Root, SWX, and KHQ. We're going to go back through the week that was. We're going to go through the WCC, adding Oregon State and Washington State. We're going to talk about the big game coming up with San Diego State on Friday. A couple other topics we'll throw at you, but we'll start with the rankings. The Zags climbed up a couple spots to number 13. They were 7th at one point, and then they lost to the Huskies, Washington Huskies in Seattle. A week later, they lost to the UConn Huskies in Seattle. That sent them down to 15th overall. But they got back on the winning track last week against Jackson State, and they're at 13 right now. More importantly, probably in the net, Zags, I believe, are 45th the last time I checked. That is getting into the land of uncomfortableness, where you're not sure you're in the tournament or not, but most of the brackets do have Gonzaga in the 6 or 7 range. Interesting that the bracket matrix, which is a kind of a accumulation of 35 projections or so, that has a range on Gonzaga, I believe, from 3 to 12 on the seeding line. But let's get to the important stuff first. Richard Fox, how did Christmas go in the household?
It was up and down, to be honest with you. We had some sickness go through the house and through extended family, so we had to kind of pivot and adjust here and there. But we had a great Christmas morning. Santa was good to the house. And we have decided to make this Christmas week, Jim. So we've got plans starting tomorrow and through the weekend to kind of make up for some stuff we weren't able to do.
Oh, well done, Foxy. Well done. Well, the highlight here.
How about you?
The highlight here was I was opening a lot of gifts that were like barbecue related, like,
nice.
Fancy grill implements and those rubber gloves for, doctoring your meat up and all the various spices and everything. And then the last thing was a new Traeger grill.
I was just going to ask. I was going to ask, what is your grill of choice?
You
like
it
a Traeger?
Is now a Traeger, my first Traeger. So I'm a newbie, but I got even something I can read up on how to use it, what pellets to buy, all the inside story on it. So we'll be putting that to use here probably in the next day or so.
Nice.
Great Christmas as always. So let's move on. Basketball in Gonzaga land, another interesting week and one coming up for sure. Jackson State, I think you were on the call for that game. The Tigers were quite a bit more competitive than the other SWAC teams GU has faced, Mississippi Valley State, and as well as Arkansas Pine Bluff. But in the end, it was still, a lopsided affair. The Zags won by 24. The big guys had their day again. They seemed to dominate those SWAC teams pretty well. That was the night. I think Graham Ike had 22 points, 17 minutes. Hickman for 18. Braden Huff again, big off the bench with 17. Didn't shoot it as well as you're kind of hoping that bounce back at the 3-point line. They're 5 of 18 on threes in that game, but for the most part, kind of a business-like win, clear advantage on the court, and took care of business in a game they're supposed to win pretty easy.
Yeah, I'm confident. All of Gonzaga's bigs would probably be all league in the SWAC at this point. Pretty confident about that after 3 games. I think at one point they were at 40 in the second half, and then obviously called up the dogs a little bit. And Jackson State had some shots late, that I'm sure they wish they could have knocked down earlier in the game, maybe towards the end of the second half or first half, rather, start of the second half. But Yeah, I mean, to me, it was, you feel good, guys broke a sweat. I thought the approach was good going into the break. That's always a scary game, is hence, maybe why you schedule a team like Jackson State is, um, we forget, I think, at times that we're dealing with young men here, and they can often be looking around the corner to some home cooking and just getting a break, and you're not quite sure what kind of approach you're going to get. And I thought the approach was really good, first and foremost. And you just, at this point in the year, I think we've known this for a while, but clearly this team is the core of it is what they can do up front, and we saw that against Jackson State. And yeah, I mean, I think that was the one thing that I took away, maybe that wasn't positive, was just they continue to struggle from three. The last four games have been brutal.
Yeah.
And it just I think we may have touched on this last week. It's not as if you and I are Monday morning quarterbacking some sort of scheme or trying to pretend we know more about basketball than Mark Few and saying their offense is struggling for these reasons.
Yeah.
The shot quality has been good. And it's going to be really interesting, not just this Friday, but I think when you get into league is harder in a lot of respects than the non-conference, even though the overall quality of team is lower. The familiarity between these programs is much higher, and I think teams in the league have more courage to try to throw in a wrinkle or a twist that maybe in a non-conference one-off game you're not going to really deviate a lot from what you do. I think as we move through the year, it's until Gonzaga's guards start hitting some shots consistently, we're going to start seeing teams play more and more off of guys like Nemhard and Stromer. And I thought you started to see that a little bit against Jackson State. They didn't really commit to it 100%, but we saw some stretches where Nemhard's catching it on a kick out and he's all alone.
Yeah.
Now they creep up and get into his space a little bit just because that's what they want to do. But here's hoping for the New Year's resolution as they start knocking down threes.
Well, I went back through, and because I think we mentioned it, or you mentioned it the last time we talked, that their 3-point percentage, it's 33% going into that game. I went back through. I think that's the lowest since the run started. The lowest I remember seeing was 35.3, and there was 4 or 5 years in the 40s there, which is really hard to do. I mean, for a season to shoot that high. And I haven't gone back further, but something tells me that might be, one of the lowest in 30, 40 years at where they're at currently at that 33%. So we'll see if that changes in the new year. But before we get to the new year, we've got one more game in the 2023 calendar year, and that's a big one. San Diego State.
Yeah.
A team that played for the national championship last year, kind of came out of nowhere in the tournament and made a huge run to the final. Gave UConn a pretty good game. I don't know. I think it ended up about 15-point differential, but this team always, with Brian Dutcher at the helm, always good defensively, very good, always physical. They're going to get into you. They're going to challenge you. They're going to try to beat you on the glass. And win the physical battle. This team's no different. I think the Aztecs are 10-2. They're number 29 in the net, which would qualify as a quad 1 game. Zags are 0-3 in quad 1. San Diego State is 0-2. They don't have the marquee wins, just kind of like Gonzaga, same situation. Right. They beat Washington in overtime. The Zags lost to Washington, but they lost to BYU, who's now ranked right behind GU, and they lost to Grand Canyon, who the Zags played in the tournament last year. There are two teams here that are really in need of something to grab some headlines around the country. Kind of both in the same boat going into this game, I think, Foxy.
Yeah, I mean, I think if just going into the year, I suspect San Diego State would have circled Gonzaga as their marquee opportunity in the non-conference. I don't think Gonzaga would have done that. Yeah. But certainly this is the most important non-conference game Gonzaga's had at this point, given some of the missed opportunities and against Purdue and UConn, and obviously kind of falling apart down the stretch against the Huskies. San Diego State, I think, was picked to win the MountainWest. This is a good team. This is a good opportunity on your home floor to beat a quality opponent. I think we all expect them to be a tournament team and to compete to win that conference. Within the Mountain West, it's a good league.
Yeah, it is.
So, I mean, look, this is going to be, both teams are going to be highly motivated. You presume well rested coming out of the break. Hopefully nobody has that holiday hangover. They come in refreshed. They've got 6 guys that play over 23 minutes a game, and then 3 others between 10 and 12 that kind of play, I think, depending on the situation. To your point, they're really good defensively. Whole team's under 40% from the field, under 30 from 3. They struggle to shoot, much like Gonzaga. The difference is they've got a couple guys in Parrish and Butler that shoot a good, Waters and Parrish that shoot a good percentage from 3 in their starting lineup. So they've got guys who can make shots. They just don't have a lot of depth from the 3-point line. And they get to the line. They're very, very physical. And that starts with their big kid. Ladie, played every game last year for him, but didn't start. Was a really good role player. But, I mean, he looks like a pro this year. Just very physical. He's a strong, explosive athlete, averaging 22, 10, or just over 9 rebounds a game. Shoots it at a really good clip, makes his free throws, gets to the line a ton, 76% from the free throw line. Doesn't shoot a lot of threes, but 8 of 20 on the year. So you've got to honor that shot from him, but he does have good range on his jump shot against UW. He hit some clutch jumpers in the second half, excuse me, and in overtime. That's going to be an interesting matchup. Is what up front. I think Gonzaga, or rather San Diego State, has the best, probably the most complete player up front in Ladie. But Gonzaga has a lot of depth. San Diego State doesn't have it. They've got bodies. They don't have the quality of depth that Gonzaga does. This is the type of matchup that I personally, worry about for Ike. Ladie is a strong-bodied, long kid, but also really mobile, active, vertical. We've seen Ike struggle a little bit with that profile versus a guy who's more ground-bound but strong, and where Ike can really use his strength to kind of match that. So it's going to be interesting. Every game comes, in a lot of ways, comes down, as you know, to team, and you're trying to take away what teams do and force them to do well, to enforce them to attempt to get in what they struggle to do. I think both Gonzaga and San Diego State have things they do really well and things they really struggle at. It's going to be fascinating to see how these coaching staffs kind of build their game plans to try to force each other into maybe doing some things they'd rather not.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking it might be an Anton Watson defensive assignment. He always seems to get the most dangerous player on the other team, even if it's not necessarily a forward. I would think he would line up against that kid. I think Ike, a couple of Zags are going to have some motivation here. Ike played against San Diego State, obviously, in his first, 2 years at Wyoming before he transferred. And I think he had a little bit of success, but, they've always got quality big guys and can guard, and they're physical. They'll use fouls. They'll rotate guys through. I think that same approach is there, but they really need Ike in this game, obviously. I think he'll be driven. I think Ryan Nemhard's squad at Creighton ended up being bounced from the tournament by San Diego State last year. So he's probably pretty highly motivated when he sees that San Diego State uniform. Is that the matchup you're looking forward to? What, Anton in the middle, guarding Ladie, or maybe Ike? What do you think?
My instinct is, look, Ladie gets the line 8 times a game, and I want Watson to play. If I'm going into the game, I want Watson to play 40 minutes.
Yeah.
So I think Anton's going to certainly have stretches where he's going to be assigned Ladie, but I think it's, from the jump, I don't know if I would do that. I think it's more about guarding him collectively. And when I talk about a game plan, it's making sure your guys understand, look, if I'm guarding Waters or Parrish, I'm probably not helping because those guys shoot over 40% from the 3-point line. But if Butler or Sounders is in the game, that's who I'm helping off of. And our rotations are based off of that. Or I might double big to big. I might bring Anton in to help on those catches. But you're right. I mean, it's going to be a game that, if it's the possession to get a stop and San Diego State's trying to win the game here towards the last possession of the game, certainly want Anton guard Lede. I mean that's the matchup you want. But I think over the course of a game, I would expect EK to start on him. He's effectively their center. Yeah. It's just going to be an interesting game plan to watch because Lede's got all the strength that he needs to go up with EK, and EK's got a lot of that. But he's just a more mobile athlete. I'll be interested to see if they double him. EK struggled with foul trouble against some of these top end teams this year. If I can keep him out of foul trouble and have him maybe play closer to 28, 30 in a game like this because of his offense, I mean, the inverse of this too is you want to force Lede. Is it Lede or Lede?
You got me.
Yeah, so let's go Lede. It's you want Lede to have to defend as well.
Yeah.
And the one thing is, as good as Huff, rather, let's start with Greg. As good as Greg is in these games, and I expect Ben to play really well, just because how competitive he is, and I think he just knows how to play in these types of games. He's not going to go to work on the low block. Huff has been an all SWAC guy, and he's got a ton of talent, but he hasn't done much outside of USC against Power 5 teams.
Yeah.
And what he's done has been shoot the 3-point shot. Over 60% of his attempts have come from beyond the 3-point line. That doesn't really put a lot of foul pressure on the opposing front line. EK can do that. I want EK in the game because he can score against that type of player, but he puts a lot of foul pressure. I want to force San Diego State to guard in a low block. So I think it's going to be imperative that they keep EK out of foul trouble. And a good way to do that is to offer up help when you can against Lede, particularly when he's on the low block. Because, he does a fabulous job. If you watched him, against St. Mary's or against UW, I forget what tournament that was, maybe the Continental Tire over the holidays. He kind of he hides on the weak side, and they do a great job of kind of swinging the ball around. And he does he's as good as anybody I've seen this year of just flashing into the middle, putting his defender on his back, and just carving out space. He's so strong. Yeah. And despite being 6'9", he's got a really low center of gravity, and they do a good job delivering it to him. And once he has both feet in the paint, he'll go through guys. He's that kind of athlete. He doesn't shy away from contact. So, you want to force him to guard. So that to me will be the key is watching EK's minutes and his foul situation. And then the second thing is it might just come down to which one of these teams can knock down threes, because both teams just are not good collectively. And then I think something else that's going to be interesting, and I think it'll be I'm going to the game just for fun. It might be a little bit. You've been to all the games. Waters is 6'6" and Parrish is 6'6".
Yeah.
They're smaller as they get into their bench, but their starting backcourt's enormous. And just compared to what Gonzaga's got going to start the game, I'll be interested to see what those matchups are. Who does Stromer start out on? Because they just have a lot of size.
Yeah. Well, let's move on. Big news here in the Inland Northwest and the West Coast. Washington State, Oregon State joining the WCC in hoops, volleyball, pretty much every sport other than football. Those two schools have an agreement with the MountainWest for football scheduling. It's a 2-year arrangement if it goes that long with the WCC. I think it's a smart move for the WCC in a lot of ways. Just gets their numbers up to 11. You add 2, nationally known schools, programs. Everybody in the country knows they were in the Pac-12 for 100 years. Right. So, you add that kind of cachet. From the basketball standpoint, I don't know if it adds a ton. Oregon State had a great run to the Elite Eight 3 or 4 years ago, but has struggled since. Washington State has been a tournament team at times, doing a very good job with Kyle Smith taking over that program. But not actually their net is 44. I believe they're one ahead of Gonzaga in the net rankings. But I think it does give the WCC some protection, so to speak. If Gonzaga were to leave, reinforces their numbers a little bit with BYU now in the Big 12. General thought on those two schools coming to the WCC for the next 2 years? A good move or bad move for the conference?
I mean, I confess I don't really know what to make of it for the league. Expand on that idea that it's good for the league because it protects them. What do you mean by that? I'm just curious.
Well, if Gonzaga was to leave for the Big
Right.
12, and that's obviously those talks are still going on. I don't think that changes anything from Gonzaga's perspective about that. If they were to leave, the WCC would have.
Right.
I think they'd be at 10, still have an option to move, and do some other things that they'd like. But I think it gives them a little more of a comfort level with numbers. A couple of teams that will fit very well into the conference in terms of playing ability, and heck, Kyle Smith kind of cut his teeth in the WCC as a coach. He worked for Randy Bennett. I think he was at San Diego for a while as well, and was the head coach at USF and did a nice job at USF before he got the WSU job. So I think it does that. I think if Gonzaga were to leave, the WCC would have a little more stability. Now, some of that depends on how long those two are in. If this becomes a longer binding situation, we'll see. And I don't think it changes Gonzaga's, thought process all that much. They're still talking to the Big 12. My guess is that would be option one if an invitation ever came their way, that they would probably accept it and join the Big 12. But it's gone on for 14 or 15 months. I don't think that's necessarily, means it's not going to happen. I think what it might mean is if an invitation were to come, in January or February, it's almost impossible to that turnaround to try to join next year. I think it would mean the Zags would be in the WCC for another year at least, the longer the conversations go before an invitation. But I think in general, smart move by Stu Jackson, the new commissioner. Yeah. And I think it just kind of gives them a little bit of a cushion if something were to happen. And if not, I think it becomes a little more interesting league.
Yeah, I mean, look, certainly Oregon State's not good, but they are better than Pacific and Pepperdine.
Elite Eight a few years ago. That's impressive.
Yeah. That is impressive. It was a few years ago. But WSU I like Kyle Smith. He's a very good coach, and they've been respectable. And that's look, those are the two hardest places I think to probably recruit in what is the Pac-12 right now. Sure. And Kyle Smith has done a really good job of making that a competitive program. And they've produced a few pros over the years. Yeah. So I think on balance, it's not as if it's a coup for the league in basketball, which I think is our focus here. Maybe it's awesome. It's going to be, both of those are really good women's programs, is my understanding.
Very good.
Which is great. So I think you are on balance on the aggregate, improving the quality of basketball within your league. What my initial thought was, and I confess this is just, my mind spinning aimlessly, is I wondered, to me, it was maybe the advantage here is, look, at some point, the Pac-12 the Pac-12 is not going to die. At some point, there'll be some new iteration of what is the Pac-12. The new Pac-12 will exist. And none of us really know what that looks like, but the presumption, my understanding is that Oregon State and WSU will effectively poach the Mountain West, or the teams that they want in the Mountain West over the next couple of years, and create this new Pac-12 league, obviously centered around football, which everything is, that will be competitive. And to what degree, who knows? Yeah. To me, by the WCC opening up the door for WSU and Oregon State to enter into the league, what my mind went to was, well, does that provide an opportunity for Gonzaga's athletic department to start building a relationship with those two only member schools now in the Pac-12 that might lead to a situation where Gonzaga can join that league as a non-football member, which, as exciting as it would be to be in the Big 12, it is logistically a nightmare. And I think people that are in athletics understand that. I don't think fans can really appreciate what the costs associated with being a member of the Big East or the Big 12 look like versus being a member of the Pac-12, some new iteration. That's effectively the same cost structure that you have now with the WCC. It's a lot of the same cities. It's the same travel pattern. You're in the same time zone, so on and so forth. I mean, maybe if Utah or whatever teams come over, Air Force, whatever it is, you might add a time zone, but really you're keeping it all on the same coast. And to me, my suspicion is that the new Pac-12 style of basketball will be more in line with the way Gonzaga has built their brand and how they want to play. So that was where my mind went, Jim. I mean, none of us really can understand where it's all going. I mean, if you and I are talking in 3 years and there's now these 2 super division conferences for football, and it's just football, and UCLA and USC are looking at each other and saying, well, we really don't need our gymnastics or our crew teams traveling to Rutgers, and they come back to the Pac-12. It's football's on its own island. I mean, are either one of us are going to be surprised by that? I mean, the part of it, to me, I'm getting to the point now where I think, does it make more sense for Gonzaga just to wait a bit longer to see where everything lands? And I've been a proponent of saying, I've said this on this podcast and other places, I wouldn't want the music to stop and not have a seat at the table. So I do think if you get an invite, you got to take it and live with the consequences. But the more this goes on, I'm like, who knows what this all looks like in 3 years?
No,
so,
you make a great point, Foxy. I mean, that is an option. It could be an option, I should say. If the Pac-12 reformulates itself and repackages itself with certain teams, I think it's going to be like the Big 12. I think it's going to be, what are the financials? What's the travel schedule? Is there a Western branch of a Big 12 with the Arizonas and Colorado and Utah, BYU? How would that look in the Pac-12? Would they poach 4 or 5 teams out of the WCC or out of the Mountain West? I'm sorry, maybe 1 or 2 out of the WCC. Who knows? Going forward, I think it's what it looks like, what the financials are, and the travel considerations.
Well, look, not to cut you off, but there's only one financial number that I think really matters, and that's my NIL budget. Look, I've gone to 2 national championships while at the WCC, so I understand the argument that is the WCC's level of play is not as good as the Big 12 or the old iteration of the Pac-12. I get all that, and that's true. But despite whatever albatross the league may be in your mind, you have been at the highest level. So what's changed is the conference realignment. Sure, that's part of it. But if Gonzaga's NIL budget was $10 million a year, they'd be just fine. Like, I mean, so that to me is this new dynamic. If NIL didn't exist, then the idea that you have to leave the WCC, I totally would understand. Like, that's hands down. You can't afford not to. Yeah. But if you go to the Big 12 and your NIL budget doesn't increase to what it is now, I mean, over time, you're gonna get run over. I'm sorry. That's just the nature of the college athletics now is you are paying for players. We're not talking millions of dollars, outside of some very unique circumstances, but you are talking tens of thousands of dollars for guys on these teams, and often these guys don't ever play. Yeah. And so, that's the deal to me. If you go to this new Pac-12, you go to the Big 12, the travel budget, the financial incentives to go, the TV money, that's all super important. But if my NIL budget isn't there, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to win anyway. I might get all those other things, but I'm not going to win. And so it's just an interesting time. It'd be a fascinating, like, just even if you had to get it all off the record, like how hard is it right now to be an athletic director, and to be a coach and to, all of these things. I mean, and I we've read things, on a national level about, to some degree about this, but I can't imagine just how hard it is to try to understand where things are going. But the one thing is that I've got to have I have to have enough NIL funds to compete with the teams I want to compete against. And I'm not trying to have more NIL dollars than LMU. I'm trying to have as much NIL dollars as Kansas. That's a different deal.
That's a tough ball game right there now.
That is a tough ball game.
Well, Foxy, well said. I'm glad to see the eggnog has not clouded your brain judgment. You're still sharp as always. Look, let's wrap it up on that. I'm sure we're going to talk about this, the new WCC, what it looks like coming down the road, and Big 12 if it ever happens. We'll talk about all these things down the road. But for now, that's going to wrap it up for the Zags Basketball Insiders podcast. Happy New Year, Foxy. Happy New Year to everybody out there. Buddy. And we'll post this later this afternoon, and we'll be back with you next Wednesday. I think that'll be the last Wednesday show. We'll go back to our usual Monday. So thanks for listening. Catch you in a week.